on why we believe what we believe. Ideally, you raising your hand for a sheet? Okay. Ideally, you already know why you believe what you believe. Now, that's what I'm hoping. But there may be some questions that some folks have, and hopefully, if there are, we'll get those answered during class. If we have not yet covered something that you want covered, let me know, and we will, I'll try to present some material on that so we can get down why we believe what you're curious about what we believe. All right. Last week we started this worksheet. Well, not a worksheet either. It's a study sheet. And I thought I had one with me. I believe I do. Right there it is. We almost got started last week. I just sort of introduced the subject and it took off all on its own, which is good. That's exactly the way I want it every time. But let's go back to the top of this page. I want to reiterate, which is an interesting word because I've never heard anybody say they want to iterate something. Just going to reiterate, which means you're coming back to it. Those three questions that I think are three examples of wrong questions we ask. What's wrong with instrumental music in worship? That's not the right question in my estimation. And where does the Bible say we can't use instrumental music in worship? That's also a faulty approach, I believe. And is using instrumental music in worship a salvation issue? Now, that's a good question, but I don't think it's the right question upon which we should base our decision to use it or not to use it. There are a lot of things, I would imagine, that are not specifically noted as salvation issues, but still you know where you want to come down on that side of the question. I thought I had an example, but I'll leave that to you to imagine a good example of something like that. And then number one, this is to me a strong point, and I don't believe I made it last week, so let's look at number one. Is it safe to assume that God has guided us into all that he wants us to do to worship him? I think that question should be answered in the affirmative. I think God has guided us into everything he wants us to do to worship him. Did he forget or neglect this particular aspect of it? Did he forget to say, oh man, I meant to tell him it's okay to use guitars, or it's okay to have a band, or it's okay to have an organ as long as it's played tastefully? God doesn't forget things like that. Why do we have a Memorial Day? Because we forget. And we don't want to forget. There are some things we choose to remember on purpose because they are, we know, important. God does not forget. He doesn't come back and say, oh, I missed out on that. If God really wanted us to use instruments, would he not have made sure to make it clear in the text of the New Testament? How could he have made it clear that it's okay to use instrumental music? And really, that's not the question. Is it okay to use them? What should be the question? The question should be, does God want us to use instrumental music? And if he wants us to use instrumental music, I'm sure he would have put something in there to let us know, yes, I like this. Because who's worship for? It's for us. God has never put anything in there instructing us to do worship in a certain way because we're going to like it. To my knowledge. Now, if there's a passage or a text or if there's a principle in there somewhere that teaches that, I want to know it. Johnny?
We do not worship according to the Old Testament, but even in the Old Testament, he gave pretty strict guidelines about his worship. And even the instruments that were used came through God, from God through David.
Yes.
And there's a couple of scriptures I didn't look at them all. I think Jeremiah 30, or verse chapter 30, 31 talks about the instruments basically okayed by David.
Yes. And not even just for worship, but instruments were used to call people to worship. The trumpets were sounded, and Leviticus taught us that the trumpets were sounded as a memorial that this day was to be a Sabbath to you, a special Sabbath. So instruments were used, but Is there a time, or are there some times when you want music and other times when you don't want music? Sometimes you want to watch TV, other times, I don't want to watch TV. How do you know when those times are? You know because you know what you're thinking, you know what you're feeling. How do you know when those times are for somebody else? I ask the question sometimes, who do you want to select the music that you're going to be listening to? Yeah, me. I think all of us feel that way. Very seldom do we, and I used to use the illustration of your Walkman. Anybody know what a Walkman is? they were just really short-lived right there. But the whole idea of a Walkman was, wow, you can have music that you can listen to that's personal. You can put a CD in there, and you can walk around and listen to your CD. And, okay. Well, who do you want picking out your CD? Even when you buy a CD, I don't know about you, but I'll buy a CD for 2 or 3 songs that are on that CD. And I don't even want to listen to the rest of them. It's the same group, same performer, same artist, but I don't want to listen to all their stuff. There's just a couple of songs on there I want to listen to. So there are times when we want music, there are times when we don't. And even though there was the use of instrumental music in the Old Covenant, it wasn't all that prevalent. And to me, there's another issue here that helps me see, well, maybe not in the New, because it was used in the Old. What would God have had to do to show us under the New Covenant that we should be doing that?
Example.
Okay, an example. What would we have needed? Jesus and the apostles went out to the Mount of Olives and they sang a hymn and played a harp. Oh, okay. Jesus and his apostles are using a harp. Maybe we could use a harp. It sounds like they did that as a good thing. That's an example. What about a command? When possible, I want you to praise me with stringed instruments. And if it said that, well, then we got 2 choices there. Stringed instruments that God directs us to use, or stringed instruments that he says, your option. Your option. How many of you like bagpipes? I love them. I like to listen to them. Obviously, not all of you do. 2 or 3 minutes. Okay. Bottom line is, if we're going to move ahead with something in worship, the way to do that is to have some guidance from God. And there is no guidance from God regarding this. And the question, did he forget, is kind of a good question to think of, because God doesn't forget. And do you not think, as I think, that he couldn't see this controversy coming down the pike? Do you think when the controversy arose in the church and among the Lord's people about instrumental music and worship that he said, oh man, I wish I'd have seen this coming. I'd have put something in the New Testament about it. But he didn't put anything in the New Testament about it. All the writings of the apostles, everything that was in the Gospels, everything in the book of Acts, all we needed was one example of an instrument being used or one teaching leading us in that direction, but we don't have anything. And so if we use it, whose guidance are we following to use it? We're using our own guidance. Here's a question that came up last week. I'm not sure we got it answered. Aren't employing instruments the same thing as employing a sound system or a songbook? Because those things are not scriptural. Are they the same? If I use a songbook, have I changed the teaching to sing? If I use a sound system so you can hear me preach, have I changed anything about preaching and listening? No, I just made it easier. But if we had an instrument, now somebody is playing an instrument. And now the focus is different. I don't know how many of you have been somewhere where they've used instruments in worship, but it changes the focus. For me, And I've had a lot of people tell me the same thing. It changes the focus. You find yourself listening to or sometimes the music drowns out the singing. And the vocalizations, whatever quality you think you've got, is what God is asking for. And I need to hear those as well. And if I can't because of the instruments, it just seems like there's something amiss. Billy? Mm-hmm. Right. Yes. Right. And I made the same observation. And while I make that observation, let me say this for the purpose of our study. We're not studying this to condemn what anybody else does. That's not the point of this, and that's not what Billy is saying. The whole point of this is to make observations from the Scriptures especially, and then make other observations from what's actually happening in life and what people are doing, and say, okay, what fits best with God and practical use. That's what I'm hoping that we'll be doing in this class, rather than picking and pointing fingers at anybody else. I don't think anybody's doing that. I'm just saying I don't want you to think I'm doing that. I don't study baptism to condemn people who don't believe in baptism. I don't study and teach the inerrancy of the Scriptures to point fingers at people who don't believe in the inerrancy of Scriptures. I'm trying to get us back to what the Word teaches. Carolyn?
This my other sister, who worked at the open fund and very liberal ethic. They had a woman on one side, they were sitting and a man on the other, and they could, if she was a deacon, she could do that. And I couldn't say what was the.
Okay.
And I don't know. I just know that the women are not supposed to be leading.
Right. And when something is different, just because something is different doesn't mean it's wrong, but sometimes things are different and they are wrong. And how are we going to know the difference? We go back to the book. We go back to God's revealed will. Right. All right. Last week we did talk about number 2, Abel and Cain's sacrifices. Is there any more observation or discussion you want to bring up on that? Anything at all? Yes. Sure, it was a message. And other instruments were used specifically in a worship setting. We're not trying to say, well, if it was used under the old covenant, it must be okay to use in the new. What we are trying to say is, what's right under the new? Because that's the one we're living under. We can see what they did and what God approved up at that point for that purpose, but things are different now. Yes, Frank?
God will be the judge.
Yes. And so if God's going to, let's go back and look at that passage. There's a passage in John chapter 12, verse 48. It's Memorial Day weekend, and I try to remind myself of this particular teaching of Jesus often. Look at verse 44. John 12:44. Jesus cried out and said, "He who believes in me does not believe in me, but in him who sent me. He who sees me sees the one who sent me. I have come as light into the world, so that everyone who believes in me will not remain in darkness. If anyone hears my sayings and does not keep them, I do not judge him, for I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. He who rejects me and does not receive my sayings has one who judges him. The word I spoke is what will judge him at the last day. For I did not speak on my own initiative, but the Father himself who sent me has given me a commandment as to what to say and what to speak." I know that his commandment is eternal life. Therefore, the things I speak just as the Father has told me. What's going to be the standard of judgment on the last day? The things that Jesus taught, yes. What's he going to do about folks who use instrumental music in worship? I don't know. I don't know. But because I don't know, that's the very reason I don't want to use it and show up in judgment wondering what will God's judgment be towards me because I do. I want to do the things that I know God has given his approval for. And if I do what he approves, then I don't have to worry showing up in judgment wondering, what's he going to think of me for observing the Lord's Supper every Sunday? Oh, well, I think he's going to like that because that's what he taught me to do. What's he going to do when I show up in judgment having sang and made melody in my heart? Well, I don't have to worry about that because he told me to do that. What's going to happen in judgment when I show up there having been somebody who led prayers and who prayed with people when we got together for work? Oh, I don't have to worry about that because he taught us to do that. What's going to happen when I show up in judgment and every first day of the week I took some of my money and I laid it by in store for the Lord's work? I won't have to worry about that because he taught me to do that. And as long as I can always say that, I know I don't have to worry. That's why John, we're studying 1 John on Wednesday nights. We haven't got to the text in John where he says, perfect love casts out fear. And if you love God perfectly, what are you going to do with his word? You're going to keep it. You're going to add to it? No, because adding to it is not keeping it. That's what we're going to do. What's God going to do in judgment? I don't know. That's why I don't want to do it. Billy and then Jerry. Okay, Jerry, you're first.
I've had very limited experience being in a church building where they use instruments, but I have. And I find myself more in judgment of what the instruments are being played, if they're the way I like it or they should be, or they're harming. We turn into judges rather than worshiping God, in my opinion.
Right.
The instruments up there, you're turning yourself into a judge.
Right. No, we can do the same thing with people's singing, but what normally happens to me when I hear somebody singing and their voice, their vocalizations are not what we would call beautiful.
But people have to study to learn to play the way they did.
Right.
That
was what God gave him, and it points out my own imperfections. That's what it makes me think about. I'm singing, and even if my voice is absolutely perfect, it's an absolutely imperfect guy singing that way. Of course, I don't sing that way, but that's what it does for me. But I make the same observations about instruments. You judge instruments, the playing of instruments, as performance. A lot of things could be said. The bottom line is, what do the scriptures say? And I think one of the points we need to make is from the Old Covenant. It's in Leviticus chapter 10. And I find myself doing this also. I find myself enlarging passages more and more. When I started out preaching, of course I was young, and I want to get right to the meat, and so I'll go right to the very single verse that had the line in it that I wanted to use in a lesson. But I find more and more as I grow older, well, I should expand and not just use that verse, but use a little more to get it in context. And I used to use just a few passages out of Leviticus 10, but now I use 1 through 20. I think you'll see why. Let's read this together. Leviticus chapter 10, verses 1 through 20. Well, instead of me reading it, you get to hear me all the time. Who will read 1 through 7? Leviticus 10, 1 through 7. Anybody? Let's not waste time. Need a reader. All right, Janie. And after Janie is finished, 8 through 20.
Each took his censer and put fire in it and laid incense on it and offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded him. And fire came out from before the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord has said. Among those who are near me, I will be sanctified, and before all the people I will be glorified." And Aaron held his peace. And Moses called Mishael and Elzaphan, the sons of Uziel, the uncle of Aaron, and said to them, "Come near, carry your brothers away from the front of the sanctuary and out of the camp." So they came near and carried them in their coats out of the camp, as Moses had said. And Moses said to Aaron and Eleazar and Ithamar his sons, "Do not let the hair of your heads hang loose, and do not tear your clothes lest you die, and wrap them upon all the congregation. But let your brothers, the whole house of Israel, bewail the garment that the Lord has kindled. And do not go outside the entrance of the tent meeting, lest you die. For the anointing oil of the Lord is upon you." And they did according to the word of Moses.
We've got 8 through.
Well, it's 8 through 15. Anybody? Oh, go ahead, Jared.
Then the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, "Do not drink wine or intoxicating drink, you nor your sons with you, when you go to the tabernacle of meeting, lest you die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, that you may distinguish between holy and unholy, and between unclean and clean, that you may teach the children of Israel all the statutes that the Lord has spoken to them by the hand of Moses." And Moses spoke to Aaron and Eleazar and Ithamar, his sons, who were left. "Take the grain offering which remains of the offerings made by fire to the Lord, and eat it without leaven beside the altar, for it is holy. You shall eat it in a holy place, because it is your due and your sons' due of the sacrifices made by the fire to the Lord. For I have been commanded. The breast of the wave offering, and the thigh of the heave offering, you shall eat a certain place, you, your sons, and your daughters with you, for they are your due and your sons' due, which are given from the sacrifices of peace offerings of the children of Israel. The thigh and the heave offering of the breast of the wave offering, they shall bring with the offerings of fat made by fire, to offer as a wave offering before the Lord, and it shall be yours and your sons with you by a statute forever, as the Lord has commanded."
And 16 through 20, you got that? Okay, okay, all right, go ahead.
And Moses diligently sought the goat of a sin offering, and behold, it was burnt, and he was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, the sons of Aaron, which were left alive, saying, "Wherefore have ye not eaten the sin offering in the holy place, seeing it is most holy? And God hath given it you to bear the iniquity of the congregation, to make atonement for them before the Lord. Behold, the blood of it was not brought in with the holy place, within the holy place. Ye should indeed have eaten it in the holy place, as I commanded." And Aaron said unto Moses, "Behold, this day have they offered their sin offering and their burnt offering before the Lord, and such things have befallen me. And if I had eaten the sin offering today, should it have been accepted in the sight of the Lord?" And when Moses heard that, he was content.
All right.
The priesthood is just getting started. And it's getting kind of a rocky start, don't you think? What happened to the first two priests? Where'd that fire come from? If it came from heaven, who sent it? Why did God send it? What had they done? Now, before we answer that, what are the things that in society we typically think of as horrendous, sinful things to do? Name one. Murder? Adultery? Theft? Stealing? Rape? Lying? What's that? No, that's fun. That doesn't count. Yeah, in our culture, we've got you can't murder somebody, you can't steal from somebody, you can't rape another person, you can't commit adultery. We know these are sins that we loathe as a culture, as a society, even though sometimes we do them. Remember John said, if you hate your brother, you're a murderer. Anyway, did these guys do any of those? What did they do? Okay, strange fire. That's what is said. What would have been the proper kind of fire to use? Okay? That's right. At this point, it had not been directed them, or they had not yet been directed on where to get the fire, how to kindle the fire, where the fire was to come. They had not gotten that information. So they moved on ahead. And God did not say, sometimes I think it's important to notice what God does not say or what God does not do, as much as it's important to see what he does say and what he does do. God did not say, hey, fellas, it's okay. Listen, you messed up this one time. I know, we'll get this fixed down the road, but here's the way I want you to do it. Now, I understand you doing it that way because I hadn't already told you how to do it. Did God say any of that? No. Matter of fact, he didn't say anything to them. He shot fire down out of heaven and killed them both. What was the problem according to what we read later on in verses 9 and 10? Okay, that's later. That's coming. That's another point I want to make from this. But 9 and 10, what was the issue? Okay. They failed to make a distinction between what's clean and what is unclean. Now, does that mean they were offering the wrong kind of animal? What was unclean? What was strange? That's another way to ask that question. The only thing that was strange was the fire. What they were offering by way of the physical sacrifice was legitimate. But the fire was strange. And God says, I want you to make a distinction between what is clean and what is unclean, between what is holy and what is profane. Now, why did God make that point, and why did he have Moses write it down in the book? And why did he make that point emphatically and draw on our emotions so we won't forget this, so this will be an indelible image in our mind by sending fire from heaven and consuming these guys?
That's what I believe.
And you make a distinction between what's clean and what is unclean. Apparently, according to the text, these guys had been doing some drinking. And in their drinking, their judgment was clouded, and that's why they did what they did. Do you have to be drunk to have clouded judgment? No, it probably helps. But you don't have to have alcohol in your system to fail to make a distinction between what's holy and what's unholy. Well, what makes something holy? How do we know if something is holy? God chooses us. He lets us know, this is what I want. And that what the word holy is the same as the word sanctified, and all it means is it is set apart for a special purpose. And when God said, here are the animals I want you to sacrifice, what kind of an animal are we going to read about, or did we already read about here in the same chapter? A goat. What was supposed to be done with that goat? Actually, there's supposed to be two of them. You take one goat, you put your hands on his head, the priests do this, and they confess all the sins of the people, and then they send that goat out into the wilderness. What's that goat called? He's called the scapegoat. And as Israel sees that goat go off in the wilderness, it's the idea is your sins are leaving you. What happens to the other goat? He's killed, his blood is sprinkled on the altar, and then his flesh is to be eaten by the priests. They didn't do that. Now this time fire doesn't come down from God out of heaven. What offering or what answer does Aaron offer up? Right. And God says, okay, I'll accept that. At least Moses accepted that, and apparently God did too, because nothing further happened regarding this as far as I know. But the whole point I'm thinking we need to learn from this is some things are holy, some things are profane. Now, profane doesn't mean bad. It just means it's not holy. How many of you like root beer? Okay, Dr. Pepper. Okay. What is that stuff I used to drink in high school? Faygo Red Pop. Yeah, I didn't want you to get too far with that. Because Boone's Farm came out while I was in high school too. But Faygo Red Pop was really popular when I was in high school. Which one of those three could we use during the Lord's Supper? Now, I saw a show of hands. Said you liked root beer. I saw another show of hands that said you like Dr. Pepper. What's the deal? You like root beer, you like Dr. Pepper. Okay, that's all that matters. Is this what God said to use? What if we had the grape juice like we're supposed to, but we had root beer on the side? And you could have grape juice and root beer. Yeah, okay. The whole point is, what has God told us to do? And if we honor God, we're going to honor God by doing what He tells us to do without any idea of, hey, Lord, we can improve on what you've taught us. We can make this better. We can make this more fun. Because that's the whole point of church, isn't it, anyway, to have fun?
When God told him the water in the wilderness, the way that rod over the rock or water, he struck it. He disobeyed a direct command, and, of course, didn't get to go to the promised land.
Right.
Life ended.
Now, that was the
God
second
wants
time.
us to,
The first time,
He was told to strike it, and he struck it. The second time, what was he told? Speak to it. But he did what he was told to do the first time, and it cost him going into the promised land. What did God say about that? He said, you failed to honor me in the eyes of the people. When you fail to do what I tell you to do, Moses, you fail to honor me in the eyes of the people. And that's what this is all about, honoring God. When people who are lost come into our assembly, what should they see? They should see a people who are doing everything within their power to honor God without adding anything to it to honor themselves. Because I like bagpipes, but if I include bagpipes in an assembly of worship to God, I'm honoring myself and not Him. Questions, observations about any of this from Leviticus? Yes.
In the battle of Calvary, we have a trumpet to charge, we have one to retreat. And that, I was talking about trumpet sound or whatever. But in 1 Corinthians 15, the mystery of the resurrection, it says, in a moment, in a twinkling of the eye, at the last trumpet, the dead in Christ shall rise first. The brother mentioned earlier the trumpet was used for people outside the wall so they can know something is going on. This trumpet's going to sound that the whole world will know Christ is coming back for His own.
right.
That's the only time I see a trumpet in the New Testament. It's figuratively speaking of this is something that's going to be important. The angel's going to be sent with Him, and the trumpet's going to sound, and we're all going to know, and every knee's going to bow and confess who Christ is, whether you want to or not, you're going to do it. And this is the final judgment time.
We will honor
Hear that trumpet. This idea of profane and holy isn't left off here completely, because this is the very beginning of Israel as a nation and worshiping under the law. When you get to Ezekiel, where is Ezekiel's primary work? Where does it take place? You can read about it in the first chapter of Ezekiel's writings, of his prophecy. He is by the river Chebar. Where's the river Chebar? It's in Babylon. Why is he in Babylon? Why is he a captive? He's in Babylon with Israelites because Israel has gotten away from the law. And one of the things, you can read it, let's go to it there in Ezekiel chapter 22. It was the failure of the priests to teach the people the difference between things that were holy and things that were profane. So we're getting this at both ends of the history of the law. Ezekiel 22:26. Her priests have done violence to my law and have profaned my holy things. They have made no distinction between the holy and the profane. They have not taught the difference between the unclean and the clean. They hide their eyes from my Sabbaths, and I am profaned among them. This is about 1,000 years from the time of Nadab and Abihu. It was an issue with Nadab and Abihu. It was an issue when Israel was taken into captivity. So it's an issue, making a distinction between the holy and the profane. Yes, Mike?
Just for thought, Moses disobeyed God and he took credit for some stuff that God did. And he did not enter the promised land. But he did go to heaven, did he not?
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
So somehow, he was forgiven.
Right. And I even wondered about Nadab and Abihu.
Did they lose their souls at that point? Yeah, we don't know. What's the message of the fire? The message of the fire is God does not approve of us failing to make a distinction between the profane and the holy. What's the message of Moses not going into the promised land? God does not approve of us taking credit upon ourselves for things he has done or failing, as he put it, to sanctify him in the eyes of others. That's the message. Moses didn't lose his soul. I don't know about Nadab and Abihu, but I wonder about others who have died in history. I wonder about Samson. He committed suicide, didn't he? I mean, not normally the way people commit suicide, but he did kill himself. And people wonder, well, did Samson lose his soul? I don't think so, because God gave him the strength to do it and approved of it. So, and the book of Hebrews mentions Samson with regard to his faith. So, Mike, did you have another? He's thinking.
And suicide, we could discuss that. But the Bible does specifically say the unforgivable sin is blaspheming the Holy Spirit. One better be careful.
Yeah.
Because it says you will lose your soul.
That's the only sin that I know of.
Of that's unforgivable, except perhaps for when we look at 1 John and he talks about the sin unto death. And John records God saying, do not pray for someone who's committing a sin unto death. And if you'll come back on Wednesday night, I'll talk to you about what that means. But I'm not allowed to talk to you about that on a Sunday morning. What's that? Oh, Don.
We can say that we believe these things and hold this in our conscience that we should make these instruments. And we give our reasons, and I agree with those reasons. But as far as putting judgment, we're not really maybe judging. We believe that you're wrong in using this. If we were in a congregation once, and I forgot what we went to a church.
Oh, yeah.
And they had
It was Marshall Church.
Yeah. We're not necessarily saying, we know God's mercy isn't going to extend to you because you use instruments. We're not saying we don't know how far God's mercy is going to extend to any individual or congregation who uses instruments or do anything. We're not saying that, but we are standing in judgment and saying we believe that it's wrong.
Right.
We want to do this, and we stand in judgment of the thing that they're doing. But we'll stand in judgment of no person on how far God's mercy is going to extend to you. But we want to be able to say, hey, this is what we believe the Bible teaches, why we do what we do.
Right.
Hope that you do too.
Yes. One of the things
I do on YouTube sometimes, and I've just about stopped doing it because I just can't stand watching it anymore. You'll see these videos on YouTube of people doing crazy things. One guy, a couple of weeks ago, he was on the second story of a house, and he had a table laid out, and he was going to do a backflip and land on that table. And I'm watching this, and no, don't do that. You're an idiot. But I know as I'm watching it, he didn't make it because they wouldn't have put the video up there if he'd have made it. And how many times have you seen pictures of somebody doing something and this isn't going to turn out good? Don't do that. These guys on skateboards that get up on the handrails and they ride those handrails down, I'm thinking, oh, I know what's coming. Don't do that. And now they might make it. Sometimes they'll go down the rail and they won't get hurt. Sometimes they'll do the backflip on the bike and they won't get hurt. But to me, it's an unnecessary risk. And maybe I've been called chicken and coward by some of my peers in the past because I didn't do some of the things they did, but also didn't wind up in the hospital. And somebody might be calling me a stodgy stick in the mud and a Pharisee because I don't use instruments in worship. I'm okay with that. You can call me all the names you want. What I believe from the scriptures God is doing is that, well, Marty, he's my son. He's making a distinction between what he believes is holy and profane. Now, if God is saying those instruments are all right, he just doesn't get it, okay. I don't think I'm going to be condemned by saying, try to keep what's holy and profane in the eyes of God. Unless I start doing what Don's talking about and start condemning, oh, you're playing a guitar during church, you're going straight to hell. Well, whose call is that to make? That's not mine. But I can say it's not anything that we're taught to do, so I don't know that it's something holy. What if it's profane? What if you're practicing a profane thing in the eyes of God? It's God's call, it's not mine, but there's plenty to think about. Lord willing, we'll get to the rest of this next week. Don, did you want to say something as we close? Okay. All right. Bring it back next week, bro. What's that? All right. Next week.